74 is the age when you don't expect much change anymore. My life had long been in a direction that I didn't think I'd ever get out of until the end. A spacious house in suburban Kansas City, where every corner reminds me of Elizabeth. The cup she drank from in the morning, the chair she loved to read in, the garden she'd planned so meticulously, now tended by a gardener who was paid to make it look like she was about to return. My name is Humphrey Dunham. 45 years ago, I started Dunham Logistics with one truck and ambitions that everyone thought were crazy. 30 years later, I had 120 trucks, warehouses in 4 states, and annual sales I never dreamed of when I started. 5 years ago, I sold the company. Not because I was tired or the business was no longer profitable. Elizabeth was diagnosed with cancer, and I wanted to spend every minute we had left with her. She was gone in 11 months. Too fast for me to come to terms with it. Too slowly for me not to see her suffering. After the funeral, I was left alone in the house we bought when our son Baxter was only 7 years old. Baxter. Every time I think of him, there is a strange mixture of love, disappointment, and guilt inside. I think I made a mistake somewhere. Perhaps in being too busy building the company when he was growing up, or in becoming too soft after Elizabeth died. He's 42 now, married to Whitney for 15 years. They have 2 children, Piper and Tristan, my grandchildren, whom I see less often than I'd like. And it's not the distance they live 20 minutes away. It's that they only come for special occasions or when they need something. And they usually need one thing: money. The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. Baxter's name on the screen made me sigh before I answered. "Hey, Dad, how are you?" His voice sounded chipper. Too chipper. "Fine," I replied, preparing myself for whatever came next. "Listen, I have a small favor to ask of you." At that moment, I could almost physically feel my bank account getting lighter. Baxter's little requests were never small. "Whitney needs to pay for professional development courses, and we're in a bit of a financial bind right now. It's only about $5,000. We'll pay it back as soon as my project is complete." His projects were never finished. In the 15 years since college, Baxter had changed probably a dozen careers. Financial consultant, then opened a boutique of organic products, then decided to become a photographer, then became interested in investing in cryptocurrency. He now called himself an independent business strategist. What that meant, I still didn't understand. "Okay," I said, knowing I'd never see that money. "I'll transfer it." "You're the best, Dad," he exclaimed. And for a moment I could hear in his voice the tones of that boy who used to look at me with admiration when I came home from work. "By the way, we wanted to stop by on Sunday for lunch. The kids are bored." I knew the kids wouldn't miss me. They would arrive, tucked away on their phones and tablets, barely answering my questions. But I was still excited for the opportunity to see them. "Sure, come on over. I'll be waiting at 2 o'clock. After the conversation, I opened the bank's app and transferred the money. Knowing Baxter, I was sure there were no courses for Whitney. Perhaps she wanted a new bag or shoes, or they were planning a weekend at a spa hotel. Either way, the money was gone, and I was left with the heavy feeling of letting them use me again. I looked at Elizabeth's picture on the mantelpiece. She had always been stronger than me when it came to raising Baxter. "Humphrey, you spoil him," she used to say. "He needs to learn to take responsibility for his actions." She was right. But when she was gone and Baxter came to me with his first financial problems, I couldn't say no. It seemed to me that helping my son was what would make Elizabeth happy. I realized now that I was wrong. She wouldn't have approved of what our son had become, the way he and his wife manipulated me. Whitney came into Baxter's life when he was just out of college. A bright, ambitious girl with a marketing degree and plans for a successful career. She gave the impression of someone who knew what she wanted and knew how to achieve it. Elizabeth disliked her immediately, although she never said so directly. "There's something wrong with her, Humphrey. She looks upon Baxter not as a loved one, but as a means to an end." I didn't realize then what she was talking about. I do now. Whitney's career didn't work out. After the children were born, she didn't go back to work, even though they hired a full-time nanny. Instead, she joined a country club, began spending time with the wives of successful businessmen, and tried to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. The doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Ted, my neighbor, with whom we sometimes play chess. "Humphrey, would you like to go for a walk? The weather's nice today." I nodded. glad to get my mind off my unhappy thoughts. We walked slowly through the neighborhood, past well-kept houses and perfect lawns. Ted talked about his grandchildren who had come to visit last week, about how his daughter calls every day to make sure he's taking his medication, about vacation plans for the whole family. I listened and felt a prick of envy. Ted had a family that really cared about him. Who didn't call to ask for money? "And how was Baxter?" he asked. I hadn't seen him in a while. "He's fine," I lied. "Busy with work. Still that, what's his name? Independent business?" I heard a slight sneer in Ted's voice. He'd known Baxter since he was a boy, and he'd obviously made up his own mind about him. "Yes," I answered briefly, not wanting to pursue the subject. When I got home, I sat back in my chair and looked at the picture of Elizabeth again. We had been together for 47 years. She was my anchor, my compass. Without her, I felt like a ship without a course, going wherever the wind blew. I remembered the day I sold the company. The lawyer brought the documents and we signed them in this very room because Elizabeth was already having trouble getting around. The amount I received was more than I could spend in a few lifetimes. I thought it would give Elizabeth better care, and then give me the opportunity to help Baxter and his family without worrying about the future. But instead of gratitude, all I got was growing appetites. At first it was, "Dad, can you borrow for a down payment on a house? We'll pay it back as soon as we get back on our feet." Then it was, "Dad, I have a great business idea. I need a little startup capital." Then, "Dad, Piper High is so expensive, but it's the best education," and so on and so forth. After each such request, I felt a mixture of irritation and guilt, annoyance at the fact that they thought I was an ATM, guilt at the thought that I hadn't raised my son well enough since he'd grown up like that. Sunday came faster than I expected. I ordered food from the restaurant. I'd never learned how to cook, even after 5 years without Elizabeth. Set the dining room table, got the best china. For the grandchildren. They were 40 minutes late. Baxter entered first, tall, with blonde hair beginning to thin, wearing an expensive sweater. Whitney followed him, slender, perfectly styled and made up, as if she were going to a social gathering rather than to her father-in-law's house for dinner. The kids trailed behind, already engrossed in their devices. "Sorry I'm late, Dad," Baxter said casually. "Traffic. Traffic on a Sunday afternoon in our neighborhood." "Oh, sure. That's all right," I replied. The food was still warm. Lunch went on as usual. Baxter talked about his grand plans for his new business. Whitney complained about how hard it was to find a good housekeeper. Piper, who was 13, answered my questions about school with one-word answers. 12-year-old Tristan at least talked about his new hobby, robotics. After lunch, Whitney quickly gathered the kids, citing that they needed to get ready for school. Baxter stayed late. When they came out, he sat across from me in the living room. "Dad, I need to have a serious talk with you," he began, and I braced myself for another request for money. "Whitney and I think you'd be better off in a nursing home. You're all alone in that big house. It's hard for you to take care of it." I stared at him, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My son wanted to send me to a nursing home. Not because he was worried about my well-being. I was in great shape for my age and did a great job of keeping the house with the help of a cleaning lady. No, he needed a house. My house, which I bought and paid off myself. The one that held the memories of Elizabeth. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not moving anywhere." "But Dad." "No, Baxter, I'm staying here." He looked disappointed but not surprised. I guess he didn't expect it to be a success. It was just a reconnaissance mission. After they left, I sat in silence for a long time. Something changed in me that day. Something broke. I saw clearly for the first time what I had become to my own son. Not a father to be respected and loved, but an obstacle to inheritance, a purse to draw from while I was alive, and a home to get when I was gone. I've decided that starting tomorrow, I'm going to start changing. No more unwarranted transfers. No more borrow until payday. No more, it's an investment in our future. I'm going back to being the Humphrey Dunham who built the company from the ground up. A man who knows the value of money and his dignity. After that Sunday lunch, something changed. I kept my promise to myself and stopped unconditionally agreeing to Baxter's financial requests. When he called a week later to borrow money to repair the roof, I politely inquired where the money I had given them for the same repair 6 months earlier had gone. The conversation ended quickly. Baxter said he'd call back later, but he didn't. 2 weeks of silence, and then another call. Whitney this time. Her voice was soft, almost caring. Humphrey, how are you feeling? Baxter and I are so worried. You seem different lately. Different? I could barely contain a chuckle. In the 5 years since Elizabeth died, Whitney's called me maybe 3 times on her own. And now all of a sudden, she's so concerned. I'm fine, Whitney. Thank you for your concern. We're thinking of you, really. You know the kids miss you. Why don't you come over for dinner Friday night? Inviting me to dinner at their house was a novelty. Usually they preferred to come to my place. It was more convenient to ask for money on their own property, I guess. I'd love to, I replied, genuinely surprised. What time? 7 would be perfect. And, Humphrey, she paused. I know you and Baxter have had some disagreements, but he loves you very much. We all do. I hung up the phone with the feeling that I had just agreed to some kind of deal, the terms of which I did not know. Baxter and Whitney's mansion was located in an upscale Kansas City neighborhood, the same neighborhood where the real rich people lived, as Whitney often emphasized. 400 square feet, 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, a 3-car garage. All of this I paid for as a down payment, which turned into the full price of the house. Sometimes as I drove by, I thought about the fact that I could buy a small country with the money I had invested in Baxter and his family over the past years. Dinner turned out to be surprisingly pleasant. Whitney cooked steaks, my favorite. The kids behaved themselves. Even Piper got off the phone and told me about her piano lessons. Baxter was attentive and courteous, filling my glass with wine that I knew cost over $100 a bottle. After dinner, the children went off to their rooms, and we stayed in the parlor with glasses of brandy. Baxter sat next to Whitney on the couch, and I settled into a chair across from them. So, I began, realizing that it was time to discover the true purpose of the evening. To what do I owe this warm welcome? Baxter and Whitney exchanged glances. He nodded, and she put her hand on his knee in a gesture of support. Dad, I have great news. Baxter smiled, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. I've been invited to become a partner in a consulting firm. It's a serious position with Fortune 500 clients. Congratulations, I said sincerely. That's great. Yes, it's going to change everything for us, Whitney said. But there's one thing. To make partner, Baxter has to pay a partnership fee. It's standard practice. Oh, that's it. I felt my genuine joy evaporate, giving way to familiar disappointment. How much is that fee? $200,000, Baxter said, as if it were a small thing. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but it's an investment in our future. Within a year, I'll pay back every dime, I promise. I sighed. Classic scheme. A grandiose opportunity that requires an immediate investment. A promise to return the money very soon. A story I'd heard dozens of times. What kind of firm is this? I asked. What kind of clients do they have? Baxter hesitated. Well, I can't reveal confidential information about clients. Sure, I nodded. What's the name of the firm? Apex Consulting Group, he answered quickly. They're based in Chicago, but they're opening an office here. I made a mental note to verify that information. I need to think about it, Baxter. $200,000 is a serious amount of money. Sorry, but Dad, Whitney interjected, this is Baxter's chance to finally get back on his feet. Isn't that what you've always wanted? I looked at the two of them sitting across from me with expressions of hope and expectation on their faces. They really believed I would give them money again. Just like that. No questions asked, no guarantees. I'll think about it, I repeated, standing up. It was getting late. I should get home. Whitney looked disappointed and Baxter looked annoyed, but they walked me to the door with strange smiles. The next morning, I called my old friend Noah Hicks, who we had started in the business together years ago. Noah has always had more insight than me when it comes to people. Apex Consulting Group? He queried when I told him about the evening. I'd never heard of it, but I could check it out. 2 hours later, he called back. Humphrey, this firm exists only on paper. Registered 3 months ago, office is a virtual address in a Chicago business center. No industry presence. No mention in the business press. Nothing. I felt something sink inside me. I had expected something like this, but it was still painful to realize my own son was trying to deceive me. Thank you, Noah. That's what I thought. Humphrey, Noah's voice grew serious. You have to stop giving him money. It's not helping you or him. Baxter will never grow up if you keep supporting him. I know, I replied quietly. It's just hard. Of course it's complicated. He's your son. But sometimes the best thing we can do for our children is to let them face the consequences of their own decisions. After the conversation, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at a picture of little Baxter in a baseball cap, with a baseball glove, ready to catch a ball. His face glowed with pure, childlike delight. Where had that boy gone? When had he turned into a man capable of lying to his own father for money? The phone rang again. Baxter. Dad, have you thought about the investment? The partners expect my answer by the end of the week. Baxter, I said slowly. I checked out Apex Consulting Group. That firm is practically non-existent. A pause on the other end of the line. Are you spying on me? His voice sounded both surprised and indignant. Checking what I'm telling you? It's called due diligence. Any investor does basic due diligence before investing $200,000. I'm not some investor, he shouted. I'm your son. That's why it hurts me when you lie to me. What do you really need that money for, Baxter? Another pause, then a heavy sigh. Whitney and I are thinking of buying a new car, something a little more upscale, something to match our status. Status? I interjected. What status, Baxter? You don't have a job. Whitney doesn't have a job. You're living on my money in a house I paid for. It's temporary. I have a few promising contacts who... That's enough, I interrupted him. Your Lexus is only 3 years old in perfect condition. You don't need a new car. But Dad, his voice became ingratiating, we've got our eye on a really nice model. It would be a great investment. A car is never an investment, Baxter. It's an expense, and it's a pretty big one. I knew you wouldn't understand, he said disappointedly. You've always been stingy, even when you had so much money you couldn't spend it if you wanted to. I was struck by that characterization. Stingy? Me, who paid for his education, his wedding, his house, all his wife's whims, his children's private school? Me, who's wired him probably over $1 million in the last 5 years? Baxter, I'm not giving you money for a new car. Not 200,000, not 100, not even 10. If you want a new car so badly, get a job and earn it yourself. Fine, he shouted. That's just great. You know what? Mom would never do that to me. She's always been there for me. And you're just a pathetic old man who doesn't care about anyone but himself. He hung up, leaving me with a ringing in my ear and a pain in my heart. For the next 2 weeks, they didn't call. I didn't call them either. Every time I thought about our last conversation, I was overcome with bitterness and resentment. How could he have said such a thing? How could he accuse me of being selfish after all I had done for him? One morning while going through the mail, I found an envelope with the bank's logo on it. Inside was a letter stating that a large purchase had been attempted on my credit card, but had been declined due to exceeding the daily limit. The purchase was made at a premium motors car dealership. I immediately called the bank. The representative confirmed that someone had attempted to use my credit card for a $190,000 purchase at Premium Motors. The transaction was declined because it exceeded my daily limit of $50,000. Baxter. It could only be Baxter. Somehow he'd gotten access to my credit card. Maybe he copied the data during one of his visits, or Whitney while I was distracted talking to the kids. I was furious. It was one thing to ask for money, manipulate, even lie. But stealing, trying to use my card without authorization, that was already a felony. I blocked the card and requested a new one. Then I called Noah. They tried to buy a car on my dime, I said when he answered. Who did? Baxter and Whitney tried to use my credit card at the car dealership. Noah whistled. That's out of line, Humphrey. You have to stop this. I know I do. I blocked the card. But they're my family, the only one I have left. Family doesn't steal from each other, Noah said firmly. Look, I understand this is hard for you, but if you don't stop them now, they'll never stop themselves. This will go on until you're penniless. I knew he was right. I knew I had to do something drastic. But what? Go to the police? Report my own son? What would you do if you were me? I asked. Noah sighed. Honestly, I'd talk to them first. Let them know that you know what they've done and that it's unacceptable. Set clear boundaries. And then, if they don't change, maybe it's time to reevaluate your relationship. After the conversation, I sat for a long time, pondering Noah's words. He was right. It was time to put an end to this madness. But before I called Baxter, I decided to check something out. Premium Motors was the most expensive car dealership in Kansas City. They specialized in high-end marques: Bentley, Aston Martin, Maserati. I'd never been there before. Even in the company's best years, I preferred more practical cars. Suddenly, an idea struck me. What if, instead of calling Baxter right away, I went to the showroom? Perhaps there I could find out more about exactly what they were trying to buy. It would give me a more complete picture before the inevitable conflict. Besides, I thought with sudden determination, it might be time for me to upgrade my car myself. My old Cadillac had served faithfully, but it was already 8 years old. Why not treat myself? After all, I earned that money on my own. I had the right to spend it on what I wanted, not my ungrateful son and his greedy wife. It's settled. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to Premium Motors, just to look around, just to see what's going on there. The morning was clear and cool, perfect weather for a drive around town. I put on my best tweed jacket, dark blue pants, and shine shoes. Not that I was going to buy anything, but I knew the rules of the game. At places like Premium Motors, you're treated according to how you look. Along the way, I pondered what I would say to Baxter when I called him after my visit to the car dealership. Part of me still couldn't believe that my own son had tried to use my credit card without authorization. Maybe this was some kind of mistake. Maybe he wanted to surprise me. Stupid thoughts, but I wanted so badly to find any excuse for what he had done. Premium Motors was located on the west side of Kansas City, in a neighborhood where even the buildings seemed to scream wealth and prestige. A modern glass structure with huge panoramic windows, behind which you could see gleaming cars worth more than the annual income of an average family. I parked my Cadillac in the visitor parking lot and headed for the entrance. Inside, the showroom was even more impressive. Marble floors, soft lighting, leather couches for customers. Cars stood on catwalks like works of art in a museum. "Good afternoon, sir." A young man in an impeccable suit approached me. "What can I do for you?" "I'm just looking around," I replied. "I'm thinking of upgrading my automobile." "Of course, sir. I'm Riley, and I'd be happy to show you our models. Anything in particular you're interested in?" I was about to answer when I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the far corner of the showroom. Baxter. And next to him was Whitney, in an elegant white suit that I was sure cost several $1,000s. They were standing next to a black Maserati, talking to another salesman. My heart skipped a beat. So that's why they were trying to use my card. The Maserati. A car they clearly couldn't afford. A car they were planning to buy at my expense. Sir?" Riley's voice brought me back to reality. "I'm sorry, I hesitated, not knowing what to say. "I just need a minute." "Of course, sir. I'll be there when you're ready." Riley stepped away, and I, trying to look like a normal customer, began to move slowly through the parlor, keeping Baxter and Whitney in my sights. They didn't notice me, completely engrossed in their conversation with the salesman. I walked over to the brochure stand next to them, close enough to hear their conversation, but not close enough to get their attention. "Anno, fully stocked model," the salesman was saying. "Carbon fiber package, ceramic brakes, custom interior trim, one of the best we've ever had." "It's exactly what we were looking for," Whitney said with delight in her voice. "Isn't it, darling?" "Absolutely," Baxter nodded. "When can we pick it up?" "As soon as we've finalized and received payment," the seller replied. "Maybe even today." "Wonderful." Whitney clapped her hands together like a child receiving a long-awaited gift. I could imagine the looks on our neighbors' faces when we drove up in this beauty. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. So it was all about impressing the neighbors. Not out of necessity, not out of practicality, not even out of love for cars. Just to show everyone how rich and successful they were. On me. "Let's go to my office for the paperwork," the salesman suggested. "We'll need your ID and payment information." They followed him into a glass office at the far end of the salon. I waited a moment and followed them cautiously, stopping at a nearby car and pretending to look at it. The glass walls of the office allowed me to see what was going on inside, though I couldn't make out the words anymore. Baxter pulled his wallet out of his pocket and held something out to the salesman, presumably his driver's license. Then, to my horror, he pulled out a credit card. My credit card. Even from a distance, I recognized its distinctive dark blue design with the bank's gold logo. That card had always been in the top drawer of my desk. I rarely used it, preferring to pay with another. Did he, stolen it or made a duplicate? Either way, it was beyond anything I could imagine. Without thinking any further, I walked out of the car dealership and got into my car. With trembling hands, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the bank's number. "Hello, this is Humphrey Dunham," I said when the operator answered. "I need to block my credit card immediately." "Of course, Mr. Dunham. May I know the reason for the blocking?" "The card was stolen," I answered, feeling bitter at those words. "Someone is trying to use it right now." "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Don't worry, I will block the card immediately. You should also go to the police and file a theft report." "Yeah, I'll do that," I lied. I wasn't going to go to the police. No matter what, I couldn't imagine my own son ending up behind bars because of me. After the operator confirmed the card was blocked, I didn't get out of the car right away. Part of me wanted to drive away, to avoid the inevitable confrontation. But another part, a stronger part, demanded to stay and see what would happen. I decided to wait. I turned off the engine and just sat there, watching the entrance to the car dealership. About 15 minutes had passed when the glass doors of the car dealership swung open and Baxter practically ran out of there. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. He was frantically typing something on his cell phone, holding it to his ear. Whitney followed, her face contorted with anger. "What do you mean the card is blocked?" She shouted so loudly I could hear through the closed windows of the car. "How could you not check that before you brought me here? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" Baxter said something back to her, but I couldn't hear. He kept talking on the phone, apparently trying to figure out what had happened to the map. "It took us almost 2 hours to pick out this car," Whitney continued to shout, attracting the attention of other customers leaving the showroom. "And now you're telling me we can't have it? Damn bank! Damn card! Damn you!" Baxter tried to calm her down by putting his hand on her shoulder, but she pulled away sharply. "Don't touch me! You promised me this car. You said it was settled with your father, that he had given permission." That's what he told her, that I authorized the use of my card. Another lie in an endless chain of deceit. The salesman who worked with them came out next and said something, apparently trying to resolve the situation. But Whitney wasn't listening anymore. She turned around and walked toward their car, parked not far from mine. Baxter hurried after her, still on the phone. I waited until they got into their car before I got out of mine. Now that the initial shock had passed, I was filled with a cold, restrained rage. I headed back to the car dealership. Inside, I immediately noticed the salesman who worked with Baxter and Whitney. He was talking to a coworker, probably discussing what had happened. "Excuse me," I said to him. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" He turned around, a professional smile automatically appearing on his face. "Of course, sir. What can I do for you?" The couple that just left, they were trying to use a credit card to buy a Maserati, right? The salesman's smile became uncertain. "Yes, but we had some problems with the payment." "It was my card," I said in a flat voice. "I'm the owner, Humphrey Dunham, and I didn't give it to you." The salesman's face changed, a look of understanding on his face. "Oh, I see. It's, unpleasant." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "Tell me, did they sign any purchase documents?" "A preliminary contract, yes. But without payment, it's null and void." "And how much was the contract for?" $235,000, he answered, a little hesitated. "Full equipment, additional options." I shook my head. $235,000 for the car, while they complained about not having enough money for the kids' school, for home repairs, for medical expenses. "Thanks for the information," I said. "One more question. Did they come here often? Before, I mean." "Several times in the last month," the salesman nodded. "They chose the model and the equipment very carefully, so it wasn't a spontaneous idea. They'd been planning it for months. Picked out the car knowing they would be paying with my money, without my knowledge or consent." "I see. Thank you." I walked out of the dealership feeling strangely calm. Now I knew exactly what had happened. No doubts, no excuses. My son and his wife had tried to steal $235,000 from me. A fact, plain and simple. I got in my car and checked my cell phone. 3 missed calls from Baxter. Not a single message. I decided to call him back, but first I needed to get home and gather my thoughts. As I pulled out of the parking lot, however, I saw a familiar Lexus heading back toward the car dealership. They were back. Probably came up with some sort of explanation for the salesman, or found another way to pay. I parked again and decided to wait. A few minutes later, Baxter and Whitney got out of the car. They looked more relaxed than before. Baxter said something to Whitney. She nodded. Then they headed toward the entrance. I got out of my car and followed them. Inside, they were already talking to the same salesman. Whitney was smiling like nothing had happened. Baxter looked confident. "A little misunderstanding with the bank," I heard him say as I approached. "We'd like to proceed, but with a different card." At that moment, I approached them. "Hello, Baxter," I said calmly. He turned around, and the color drained from his face. Whitney froze, her smile frozen into a grimace. "Dad?" Baxter stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," I answered. "Actually, I know the answer. You're trying to buy a $235,000 car using my credit card, without my authorization." Baxter turned even paler if that was possible. Whitney, on the other hand, flushed with anger. "You've been following us?" she blurted out. "No, Whitney. The bank notified me of an attempt to use my card for a large purchase. I came to check and saw you here." I turned to Baxter. "How did you get my card?" He lowered his eyes. "I got a duplicate. I made it when I helped you with your health insurance payment last year. You gave me your card and just in case." "Just in case of what?" I kept my voice calm, but I was seething inside. "In case you needed to steal $250,000 from me?" "It's not stealing," Whitney intervened. "Baxter said you discussed it, that you'd agreed to help buy the car." "Did he?" I looked at my son. "Did we discuss it, Baxter?" He was silent, not raising his eyes. "No," he finally said quietly. "We didn't." "What?" Whitney turned to him. "You told me he agreed. You said he'd give you a map specifically for this." "I lied," Baxter admitted. "He refused to give us the money for the car, and I figured we'd just take it ourselves." "Are you crazy?" Whitney shouted, not caring that the entire salon staff was watching. "You got me involved in a crime. Do you realize this is fraud? That we could be arrested?" Baxter finally looked up and looked me in the eye. "I wasn't going to steal, Dad. I was going to tell you. Afterward. I knew you wouldn't approve, but I thought that when you saw how happy we were, you'd understand." "Understand what?" I interrupted you. "That my son is willing to cheat on me, steal my money, because he wants to impress the neighbors?" I heard Whitney talking about the looks on your neighbors' faces when you drive up in your new Maserati. Whitney blushed even more. "That's not what I meant." "It's not." I turned to her. "What did you mean, Whitney? Tell me. I really want to know what justifies stealing from your own father." "We'd get the money back," Baxter interjected. "In time." "How did you get the money back on the house? On the children's school? On all the investments and business projects?" I shook my head. "No, Baxter. You never intended to pay that money back. You just wanted to take it, like you always took everything I gave you." There was a heavy pause. The salesman and the other salon employees carefully pretended not to hear our conversation, but it was obvious that they were watching the developments closely. "Dad, Baxter began. "No," I interrupted him. "I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear promises. I want you both to get out of here right now and think about what you've done, about how you betrayed my trust, about the kind of people you've become. And don't call me until you're ready to truly apologize and change. Until then, I don't want to see you." With those words, I turned and walked out of the car dealership, leaving them standing there in the middle of the luxury cars they couldn't afford, with their plans ruined and, I hoped, with at least an ounce of shame for what they were trying to do. I returned home in a strange state of desolation. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind fatigue and dull ache. I sat in the silence of the living room, staring at the pictures of the family on the mantelpiece. Baxter in his graduation gown, Whitney and Baxter on their wedding day, my grandchildren on last year's Christmas card. All of these pictures seemed to belong to another life, one where we were a normal, loving family. I knew they were coming. There was too much at stake for them to just disappear from my life. Money. Always the money. For their sake, they would come back, no matter how humiliating it was to their pride. The doorbell rang 3 hours after the incident at the car dealership. I took my time opening it, giving myself time to gather my thoughts. When I finally opened the door, Baxter and Whitney were standing on the doorstep. He looked depressed. She looked tense, her lips tightly pressed together. "May I come in?" Baxter asked, as if he was afraid I'd slam the door in his face. I stepped aside silently, letting them in. They went into the living room but didn't sit down, as if they felt too uncomfortable to do so. "Dad," Baxter began as I followed, "we want to apologize for what happened." "Really?" I sat down in my chair, pointing them to the couch across from me. "For what exactly?" Baxter glanced over to Whitney. She gave a subtle shrug. "For making a duplicate copy of your card," he said, finally sitting down. "It was wrong." I waited for him to continue. "And for trying to use it without your permission," he added reluctantly. "That is, for trying to steal $235,000, I clarified. "That's not stealing," Whitney blurted out, remaining standing. "We weren't going to embezzle that money. We would return it." "When?" I asked calmly. "And how? From what income?" She opened her mouth but couldn't find anything to say. "Look, Dad," Baxter stepped forward. "We made a mistake, a big mistake, but we're truly sorry. We really are, and we're ready to make it right." "How?" "Well, for starters, we'll return the duplicate card." He pulled my credit card out of his pocket and placed it on the table between us. "Here. No more." I stared at the card, feeling the anger rising up inside again. That plastic card was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in our relationship, the trust that had been betrayed, love that had turned to self-interest. "And we agree to any terms," Baxter continued, "any restrictions you see fit." "Conditions?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You think this is just another deal? Another case of bargaining away what you want?" Baxter looked embarrassed. "No, that's not what I meant. I was just going to say—" "That's enough," Whitney interrupted him, finally sitting down next to him. "Let's not beat around the bush. Yes, we made a mistake. Yes, it was stupid. But it wasn't a big deal. The money wasn't spent. The card was returned. Could we just forget about it and move on?" I looked at her, surprised by her candor. In that moment, I saw the real Whitney for the first time, not the charming daughter-in-law she'd been playing all these years, but the calculating woman for whom I was just a source of funding for her ambitions. "Forget?" I said slowly. "You want me to forget that you tried to steal from me? That you spent months planning it, picking out a car behind my back? That you lied right to my face?" "We weren't stealing," she exclaimed. "Why do you keep using that word? We just wanted to buy an automobile." "At my expense, without my knowledge or consent," I said. "What do you call that, Whitney?" She looked away, pressing her lips together even tighter. "We thought you'd understand," Baxter said quietly. "You've always been generous, always helped us. And that gave you the right to decide it was okay to just take my money without asking?" "No, but—" He hesitated. "We knew you wouldn't take the Maserati, that you'd say it was a waste of money, but it's important to us." "For image," I nodded. I heard what Whitney was saying at the salon, about the looks on the neighbors' faces. Whitney blushed but quickly pulled herself together. "Yes, for image," she said with sudden boldness. "What's wrong with that? You think your company is successful because of the quality of its services?" "No. Image, Humphrey. Prestige. Perception. That's what matters in today's world. And yes, we need this car to make people take us seriously." "What people, Whitney?" I leaned forward. "The neighbors you're trying to impress? Friends from the country club? Which of them will give you a job? Which of them will invest in your business ideas?" "That's not the point," she raised her voice. "The point is that you don't put us in anything. You think you know best what we should spend our money on." "My money," I clarified. "Shorty, which you have so much of that you can't spend it in the rest of your life." She was practically screaming now. You're sitting in this huge house all alone, saving up millions you'll never spend, and judging us for wanting to live life to the fullest? There was a silence. I stared at her, amazed at the rage that burst forth. Baxter looked equally surprised. He put his hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Whitney, don't. Yes, you do. She shook off his hand. All these years you've let your father dictate how we live our lives. All these years we've had to beg for what is rightfully ours. Rightfully? I raised an eyebrow. What right, Whitney? Baxter is your only son, your heir. Everything you have will belong to him one day. The key word is someday, I replied calmly. Not now, and probably not as soon as you hope. Whitney made a sound like a growl. See? She turned to Baxter. He's threatening to disinherit you, just because we wanted to buy a goddamn automobile. I didn't threaten anything, I said. I merely pointed out that I was still alive and well, and I wasn't about to give up control of my finances anytime soon. Baxter looked confused, sandwiched between me and his furious wife. Look, Dad, we didn't mean for things to turn out this way, he said. We were stupid, but we really want to make things right. How? I asked again. Well, for starters, you could unlock your card, Whitney suggested, changing her tactics to a more conciliatory one. We gave it back to you. There's no longer a threat. And why would I do that? Because, she hesitated, because we're family, and families forgive each other. I stared at her, trying to see some sincerity in her eyes. But all I saw was calculation. She wasn't sorry for what they'd done. She was only sorry they'd been caught. Family, I repeated thoughtfully. Yes, we are family, and that's why I'm so disappointed, because a family shouldn't lie to each other. A family shouldn't steal from each other. There's that word again, Whitney rolled her eyes. We didn't steal, You did what, Whitney? I interrupted her. Name it. What's the right word for what you did? She looked at me with undisguised hatred. We made a mistake, she finally said. A stupid, ill-considered mistake. And we apologize. What more do you want from us? I want honesty, I said. Real honesty, not fake honesty. I want you to admit that you plan to steal my money, that you deliberately set out to deceive me, that you don't see me as a father to be respected and loved, but as an ATM machine to be used. Baxter lowered his head. Whitney straightened, her eyes narrowing. You know what, Humphrey? You're right, she said with unexpected candor. Yes, we planned to use your money without authorization. Yes, we knew you wouldn't approve. And yes, we decided to do it anyway, because we were tired of you controlling us, tired of you deciding what's right and wrong for us, tired of being perpetual children who need daddy's permission for every purchase. I was stunned by her candor, but at the same time I felt strangely relieved. The truth at last, without masks or pretense. Thank you for your honesty, Whitney, I said. It's a shame it took 17 years to hear it. Baxter looked up, his eyes wide with concern. Dad, that's not what she meant. No, that's exactly what she meant. Whitney didn't let him finish. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of thanking you for every dollar you throw our way. You humiliated us today, in public, in front of all those people at the car dealership. You ruined our dream. And all for what? To show your power? No, Whitney, I shook my head. I did it to stop you from committing a crime. I did it because I love my son, and I don't want to see him turn into a thief. Don't you dare talk about him like that, she shrieked. Don't you dare judge us. You who worked your whole life for money instead of spending time with your family. You who missed half of Baxter's childhood because you were too busy building your precious company. An old wound she unmistakably felt. I really did work too hard when Baxter was little, missed too many moments that I can never get back, and now she was using that against me. You're right, I admitted. I wasn't the perfect father. I've made mistakes, and maybe what Baxter became is partly my fault. But that doesn't excuse what you did today. Baxter looked like he was about to fall through the floor. Dad, please, let's not make a tragedy out of this. We all overreacted. Why don't we just forget about it? Start fresh? I looked at my son, the man I loved most in the world, the man who tried to steal from me. No, Baxter, not this time. We can't just forget about it. It's too much to let it go. Too much lying, manipulation, exploitation. What do you want from us? There was desperation in his voice. What do we have to do for you to forgive us? For starters, admit the truth. The whole truth. I looked at them both. About how you see our relationship. About what's really important to you. About what you plan to do next. Whitney snorted. You want the truth? All right, here's the truth. We were counting on your money. Yeah, we planned to live large on your dime. Yes, we expected you to pay all our expenses because you're so damn rich. And that's what normal parents do. Help their kids. I listened to her tirade, feeling strangely calm. It was as if I'd been waiting all these years for her to finally show her true colors. And now, she continued, when you decide to play the righteous, we're left with nothing. Humiliated. Without the car we need. With a ruined reputation in the eyes of this salon that we can now never return to. All because of your selfishness. Whitney, Baxter's voice sounded warning. You're going too far. No, not too far. She turned to him. All these years you've let him control us through money. All these years we've had to smile and thank him when he condescended to throw us crumbs from his table. That's enough. She turned to me again. Do you think we come to you because we love you? Because we want to spend time with you? No, we come because we need your money. Because without it, we can't live the life we want. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd always suspected it, but hearing her say it out loud was another matter entirely. Baxter looked stunned. Whitney, stop it, he said, but there was no strength in his voice. Why? She turned toward him. He wanted the truth. Here it was, the unvarnished truth. We tolerate him because he's rich, because one day all his money will be ours. But I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of pretending, tired of listening to lectures about how we should live our lives. She stood up, grabbed her bag. Come on, Baxter. We're leaving. Your father's made it clear that we won't get a dime from him until we're what he wants us to be, and I'm not going to change for his money. Baxter didn't move, torn between his wife and his father. Baxter! Her voice was full of anger and impatience. Whitney, give me a minute, he said. I want to talk to my father alone. She looked at him in disbelief. Why? What else can you say to him? Please, he repeated. Just for a minute. She rolled her eyes but headed for the exit. Just a minute. I'll be waiting in the car. When the door closed behind her, there was a heavy silence in the room. Baxter looked broken, aged 10 years in one day. Dad, he began quietly, I know we did a terrible thing, and I know you have every right to be angry, but please don't push us away. Don't push me away. You're all I have. What about Whitney? I asked. Isn't she your family now? He sighed. You know how impulsive she can be. She didn't think before she said all that. She didn't mean it. No, Baxter. Yes, she did. And we both know it. He lowered his head, unable to object. What do you want me to do? He asked almost in a whisper. I want you to become a man, I answered. I want you to take responsibility for your life, for your family. I want you to stop expecting me to solve all your problems. But how? There was desperation in his voice. I don't know how to live any other way. Get a job. A real job, not these projects and investments. Learn to live within your means. Set an example for your children of how a decent person should live. If I do that, will you forgive us? I sighed. Baxter, this isn't about forgiveness. It's about trust, which you've broken. One that words alone can't repair. Only with actions, only time. He nodded, understanding but not accepting. In the meantime, I continued, I think we need some distance. I can't keep funding you. I can't continue to be the ATM you think I am. Are you disowning us? His voice trembled. No, Baxter, I'm not. I'm setting boundaries. Big difference. He stood up, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and anger. Do you know we can't keep the house without your help? The school for the children? Everything we have? I know, I nodded, and I'm sorry. But maybe that's what you need, to finally understand the value of money, the value of work. You're going to destroy our family, he said bitterly. Whitney will never forgive you for that. Yeah, I'm not sure I can forgive. I stood up, looking him in the eye. It's your choice, Baxter. not mine. Fine. His voice turned cold. Then know this. You will never see your grandchildren again. Never. They won't know the grandfather who chose money over family. Those words hit me where it hurt the most. Piper and Tristan, my grandchildren, whom I loved with all my heart despite their coldness. The thought of never seeing them again was almost unbearable. Are you using the children to manipulate me? I asked, trying to remain calm. That's low even for you, Baxter. No, Dad. I'm just telling you how it's going to be. Without your support, we'll be forced to move. Find a cheaper place, maybe in another state. Start over, and there won't be room for you in that new life. He headed for the door but stopped on the threshold. Think about it, about what you're losing, and whether it's worth your integrity. With those words, he walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of a house that suddenly seemed even emptier and colder than before. After Baxter's departure, I sat still for a long time, as if crushed by the weight of what had happened. His last words echoed in my head. Think about what you're losing. He knew where to hit, knew my grandchildren were my weakness. Even though they were aloof, always more interested in their gadgets than talking to me, I loved them unconditionally. The thought that I might never see them again was almost physically painful. But another part of me, the more rational part, realized that this was just another way of manipulation. Another leverage Baxter had learned to use against me. And if I gave in now, it would never end. They would continue to exploit my love and my money, never learn independence, never become the people they could be. I spent a sleepless night weighing the pros and cons. By dawn, the decision was made. Painful, but necessary. In the morning, I called my longtime lawyer, Miles Caulfield. We had worked together for over 30 years, and he knew my family almost as well as I knew myself. Miles, I need to make some changes in my financial affairs, I said without preamble. How soon can you see me? Humphrey? I could hear the surprise in his voice. Sure, I can meet you this afternoon. Is something wrong? Yes, I answered briefly. I'll tell you when I see you. At noon, I was already sitting in his office, in an old building in downtown Kansas City. Miles hadn't changed much over the years. The same shrewd eyes behind his glasses, the same attention to detail, only his hair was grayer and his wrinkles deeper. I told him everything. About Baxter and Whitney's attempt to use my credit card, about the confrontation at the car dealership, about the conversation that followed at my house, where the truth about how they viewed our relationship came out. Miles listened without interrupting, only occasionally making notes in his notebook. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I knew from years of experience. He was thinking about a difficult situation. Humphrey, first of all, I'm sorry you had to go through this, he said finally. It's not an easy situation for any parent. I know, I nodded, but I have to do something about it. Otherwise, it's never going to end. What exactly do you want to do? For starters, I want to close all joint accounts. Anything Baxter might have access to. Miles nodded, making a note of it. That's reasonable. What else? I want to change my will. He looked up at me with a wary expression. Are you sure? It's a big step. I'm not going to disinherit Baxter completely, I clarified, but I want to set up a trust fund with certain conditions, so that the money doesn't just go to him. He has to earn it. What kind of conditions are you considering? For example, he must have worked in a regular job for at least 5 years, with documentation, and part of the money must go directly to my grandchildren's education, with no possibility of using it for anything else. Miles wrote down my wishes, thinking them over. It's doable. We could set up a conditional trust. I would also recommend appointing an independent trustee to oversee compliance with the terms. That's a good idea, I agreed. Is there anything else you'd like to change, I wondered. Yes. I want to review all the automatic payments that go into Baxter and Whitney's accounts. The kids' school, insurance, utility bills. Everything I've paid so far. You want to stop all those payments? Miles clarified. Not right away, I shook my head. I don't want my grandchildren to suffer. But gradually, yes. Baxter has to learn to provide for his family. Miles made a few more notes, then looked at me seriously. Humphrey, you have to be prepared for this change to cause a strong negative reaction from Baxter and Whitney. I know, I sighed. They've already threatened that I'll never see my grandchildren again. It's hard, he nodded sympathetically. But sometimes you have to be firm, even if it hurts. If you're sure of your decision, I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the week. I'm sure, I said firmly, though my insides clenched at the thought of what I was doing. When I got home, I immediately called the bank and canceled all automatic transfers to Baxter's accounts. Then I took care of other financial matters, canceled additional credit cards, stopped paying for memberships to the country club, where Whitney spent most of her time, revoked Baxter's access to my investment accounts. With each call, with each password changed, I felt a strange mixture of release and longing. It was as if I'd cut the invisible threads that bound me to my son. Threads that had long ago turned into chains that held us both in an unhealthy relationship. I expected an immediate reaction, and it came. The very next day, I got a call from Baxter. "What have you done?" he shouted, wasting no time in greeting me. "Why are all our cards blocked? Why can't I get into the investment portfolio?" "I've changed my financial policy," I replied calmly. "Like I said yesterday, you can't just cut us off like that. We have kids, for crying out loud. Bills that need to be paid. I know, and I'm sorry it's come to this. But you have to learn to provide for your family, Baxter. That's what grown-ups do. You're just getting back at us for that car accident." His voice shook with rage. "That's low, even for you." "No, Baxter, I'm trying to help you become independent, to be the man you can be." "Fuck you," he shouted and hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling my insides clench with pain. My son, my flesh and blood, had just told me to fuck you. How had we gotten to this point? Over the next few days, the situation only got worse. Whitney called me in tears, begging me not to take away their livelihood. When that didn't work, she changed tactics to threatening legal consequences. When that didn't work either, she just screamed into the phone, venting her rage and frustration. I held firm, though each call, each text, left new wounds in my heart. Miles, as promised, had all the paperwork ready by the end of the week. I signed a new will, set up a trust fund for my grandchildren, and formalized all the necessary changes to my financial affairs. Now, even if something happened to me, Baxter and Whitney couldn't just access my estate. They would have to meet certain conditions, prove that they could live as responsible adults. About a week after the incident at the car dealership, I got a call from Ted, my neighbor and chess buddy. "Humphrey, are you okay?" he asked with a concern in his voice that was unusual for him. "I haven't seen you in days." "I'm fine," I replied, though it was far from the truth. "I've just been busy with some personal matters." "I see," he paused. "It's just, I heard some talk at the club about you." "Conversations?" I tensed, realizing where this was going. "Yeah, Baxter and his wife. They're telling people that you're, well, he clearly didn't know how to phrase it delicately, that you've gotten a little unstable after Elizabeth died, that you started showing signs of paranoia, suspecting everyone around you of trying to steal your money." I grinned bitterly. Of course they did. They couldn't just accept the consequences of their actions. They had to create a narrative in which they were the victims and I was the villain. "And people believe that?" I asked. "Some do," Ted admitted reluctantly. "You know how it is. People love gossip, and Whitney is very convincing when she tells me how you suddenly cut them off, leaving them destitute, and how she fears for your mental health." "I can see that," I said, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. Not at Ted, of course, at Baxter and Whitney, who chose to vilify me instead of taking responsibility for their actions. "I don't believe a word they say," Ted added quickly. "I know you too well, but I thought you should know what's going on." "Thank you, Ted. I appreciate your honesty." After that conversation, I began to notice a change in the attitude of my friends and acquaintances toward me. Some began to avoid me. Others looked at me with ill-concealed pity. A couple people with whom I regularly played golf suddenly became too busy for our weekly games. A woman from the church community with whom I sometimes went to classical music concerts stopped returning my calls. It was painful. I had lived in this community for decades, built a reputation here as an honest man and a successful businessman. And now, because of the lies of my own son and his wife, people were starting to look at me as a crazy old man who was out of his mind and pathologically stingy. One thought kept me on my toes. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really had been too hard on Baxter and his family. Maybe I should have forgiven them for this transgression like I had forgiven so many others. I called Noah, my old friend from the business, the only one who knew the whole story from the beginning. "You did the right thing, Humphrey," he said firmly, listening to my doubts. "It had to happen sooner or later. Otherwise, they would have just kept using you for every last dime." "But I've deprived my grandchildren of their usual way of life," I objected. "It's not their fault that their parents are like this." "No, it's not. But you set up a trust fund for their education, right? You didn't leave them unsupported. You just stopped letting Baxter and Whitney control that support." "Yeah, but—" "No buts," Noah interrupted me. "Look, Humphrey, I know this is hard for you. I know you feel guilty. But think about the long term. What's best for Baxter? Continue to live on your money, never learning self-sufficiency? Or to finally grow up and become a responsible man?" I knew he was right. Deep down, I'd always known it. But that didn't make it any easier. "What about the rumors they were spreading?" I asked. "People think I'm out of my mind." "People will always talk," Noah said philosophically. "But those who really know you won't believe the stories. And the rest of us, well, who cares what they think?" He was right about that too. But it still hurt to realize that my own son was willing to ruin my reputation just to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. The following weeks were some of the loneliest of my life. Baxter and Whitney stopped calling, turning to tactics of complete ignoring. I knew they were hoping the isolation and loneliness would make me give up, go back to my old relationship pattern. Sometimes, in particularly difficult moments, I was close to doing just that. To call Baxter, to tell him that I'd changed my mind, that I forgave everything, that they could go back and carry on as before. At times like this, I pulled out pictures of my grandchildren and looked at their faces, wondering what they thought of me now. What have their parents told them? Do they realize what's going on? Or to them, have I just suddenly disappeared from their lives? I tried calling them several times, but my calls went unanswered. I sent birthday and holiday gifts, but I didn't know if they were receiving them. That was the most painful part of the whole situation, not being able to explain my position to my grandchildren, not being able to tell them that I love them no matter what. One day I couldn't stand it and drove to their house, just to see if they were okay. I parked across the street and sat there, watching the house I had once helped them buy. Everything looked the same as usual. Manicured lawn, expensive cars in the garage. No Maserati, of course, but still cars far more expensive than they could afford on their incomes. I waited, hoping to see the grandkids coming home from school, but instead I saw Whitney come out of the house, perfectly dressed and combed, get into her Lexus and drive away. No sign of the financial difficulties they were so dramatically telling everyone around them about. It strengthened my resolve. They were doing fine. They may have had to cut back on some expenses, give up memberships to the most expensive clubs or boutique shopping, but they weren't poor. They were just learning to live within their means as most people do. I left there with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was glad to see that they weren't suffering like they tried to make me believe. On the other, I still missed my grandchildren, still felt the pain of separation from my only son. But I remained firm in my decision. Despite the loneliness, despite the gossip, despite the pain, I knew I was doing the right thing. Not just for myself, but for Baxter. Because somewhere deep down inside, I still believed that my son could be better, could be the man I'd always hoped he would be. And if I had to endure a period of alienation and loneliness to do that, I was willing to pay that price. It's amazing how quickly time flows when you stop counting it. 6 months passed quickly. Winter changed to spring, spring to summer, and now the first signs of fall are painting the leaves of the trees gold and purple. 6 months without a call from Baxter asking for money. 6 months without Whitney's manipulations. 6 months of silence that at first seemed unbearable, but then became familiar and even comfortable. I won't say it was easy. For the first few weeks, I woke up every morning with a heavy weight on my heart, checking my phone, hoping to see a message from my son, or at least my grandchildren. But there were no messages, only occasional news through mutual acquaintances. Baxter had gotten a job with some company, something to do with marketing. Whitney had sold some of her designer handbags and jewelry. They still lived in the same house, but it looked like they had to save money. Gradually, I began to fill the void that had formed in my life. At first, it was simple things, long walks in the mornings, reading books I had long put off, watching classic movies. Then I became more involved in my local community. I signed up for a photography course at the community center, a hobby I had always thought about but never found the time for. It was in that course that I met Frances Livingston, a widow about my age, with a sharp mind and a great sense of humor. She was a retired literature professor, and her view of the world through the lens of the books she taught mesmerized me. We started meeting for coffee after class, discussing our photographs and gradually moving on to deeper themes: life, loss, rebirth after tragedies. You know, Humphrey, she told me one day as we sat in a small cafe near the center, losing a family isn't always a death. Sometimes it's a conscious decision to let go of a toxic relationship. I told her about Baxter and Whitney, about what I was going through. She listened without judgment, only occasionally nodding with understanding. My oldest son was like that too, she shared when I finished my story. Always wanted more than he earned. Always thought the world owed him something. My husband and I indulged him for too long, and it didn't do anyone any good. What happened? I asked, surprised to find someone who really understood my situation. We did about the same thing you did. Stopped being his bank. Those were some tough years. He said horrible things, spread rumors about us, even tried to contest our will, claiming we were incapacitated. She smiled with a slight sadness. But you know what? Eventually he changed. Not right away, not completely, but enough to build a life of his own. Now we don't have a perfect relationship, but at least it's honest. Her story gave me hope. Maybe someday Baxter will understand. Maybe someday we can rebuild a relationship on a healthy basis. But until that happened, I decided to live my life, fully without regard for the past. I joined a group of retired travelers who organized trips around the United States and beyond. Our first trip together was to the Grand Canyon, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had put off because Elizabeth didn't like the heat. And then there was too much work, and then there was always some then. Standing on the edge of this majestic natural wonder, I felt a strange sense of freedom and peace, as if all my problems, all my pains were so insignificant in the face of this eternal beauty created by millions of years of erosion. I took some photos that I was proud of later, the first really good shots in my new collection. When I returned home after the trip, I felt a surge of energy and determination. I started planning a more serious trip to Europe, where I had never been. Italy, France, Spain, countries Elizabeth and I had always talked about but never visited. Now I could make it happen for both of us. One morning, while looking through travel agency brochures and plotting the route of a future trip, I heard the doorbell ring. Opening it, I saw Baxter. He looked different, slimmer with light stubble, wearing a plain shirt instead of his usual designer clothes. "Hi, Dad," he said, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside silently, letting him pass. We walked into the living room, where atlases and guidebooks lay open on the table. "Planning a trip?" he asked, pointing to them. "Yes, to Europe," I answered. "Have a seat. Do you want something? Coffee?" "No, thanks." He sat down on the edge of the couch, looking out of place. "I won't be long." There was an awkward pause. I waited, not intending to make it easy for him. Finally, he took a deep breath and began. "Dad, I came to apologize for everything that happened, for the car, for the map, for the way Whitney and I acted all those years ago." I watched him carefully, trying to determine if he was sincere. There was something new in his eyes, some wariness, but also a clarity that hadn't been there before. "I've been working for 5 months now," he continued when I didn't answer, "at an advertising agency. It's nothing special, an entry-level position, but it's a real job, with a real paycheck. I even got my first promotion last month. I'm happy for you," I said, and it was true. "Whitney's working too. She got a job at a clothing boutique. She doesn't like it much, but, we're getting by. Piper and Tristan went to public school. It was hard for them to adjust, but it's better now." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. He clearly hadn't just come to give me an update on his life. "Dad," he drew in a breath, as if he were about to jump into cold water. "Whitney and I, we're in trouble with the mortgage. The bank is threatening to start foreclosure proceedings if we don't make late payments within 30 days. I've been trying to find extra work, but there just isn't enough time, and Oh, that's it. The money. Money, of course. What else could bring him here after 6 months of silence? How much? I asked, interrupting him. 27,000, he answered, lowering his eyes. I know it's a lot, and I know I have no right to ask you for help after everything that's happened. But I don't know where else to turn. I looked at my son and saw in him that little boy who once ran to me with a shattered knee, looking for comfort. Part of me wanted to just give him money, to solve his problem, to be a hero in his eyes again. But I knew it would only be a temporary solution, that it would take us back to the old unhealthy pattern of relationships. No, Baxter, I said at last, I'm not giving you the money. His shoulders slumped, though I think he'd expected that answer. I understand, he said quietly. You have every right to refuse, after all we've done. It's not about that, I explained. It's not about past hurts or wanting to punish you. It's that I'm not going to solve your problems anymore. You're a grown man, Baxter. You have a family to take care of, and you have to learn to do it yourself. But we could lose the house. There was desperation in his voice. The children would have to change schools again. Friends. Then sell the house, I suggested. Find something more affordable, something that matches your real possibilities. You don't understand, he shook his head. The market is terrible right now. We'll sell below value. We'll owe the bank. It's better than losing the house in foreclosure, I pointed out. And I'm sure the bank would be willing to negotiate the terms of the remaining debt if you'd take the initiative. Baxter sat with his hands on his head. I could almost physically feel his inner struggle. Part of him, the old part, wanted to yell at me, blame me, manipulate me. But the other part, perhaps the new part, realized I was right. You're really not going to help us? He finally asked, looking up. Not even for the sake of your grandchildren? I am helping you, I said firmly, by preventing you from continuing to live in an illusion, by making you face reality and find your own solutions. He stood up and his face showed disappointment, but not the anger I'd expected. I understand, he said quietly. I can't say I agree, but I understand. We stood across from each other, father and son, separated not only by physical space, but by years of misunderstandings and bad decisions. Baxter, I said, feeling the need to add something else, I'm proud of you for finding a job, that you're trying to change your life. Those are important steps, and if you need advice, or support, or just a conversation, I'm always here. But there will be no more money. He nodded, and something resembling respect flashed in his gaze. Thanks, Dad. For honesty, he headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. You know, Piper was asking about you the other day. She misses hearing you talk about the company. It was like a stab in the heart, the thought of my granddaughter remembering me. Tell her I miss her too, both of them. I will, he promised, and left. I stood there for a long time staring at the door as it closed. Something had changed about Baxter. Not radically, not completely, but something had definitely changed. And though he'd still come for the money, this time was different. There was some recognition of reality that hadn't been there before. Maybe someday we could actually rebuild a relationship, a real relationship based on mutual respect, not financial dependence. But for now, I had to continue on my own path. The next morning, I decided it was time to do something I had been thinking about for weeks. My old Cadillac had served me well for many years, but I wanted something new for the trip to Europe, something to symbolize this new phase of my life. I went to a car dealership, not Premium Motors, of course, but a more reasonable place that sold quality cars without exorbitant prices. The consultant, a young man named Cooper, patiently showed me several models that met my requirements: comfort, reliability, and economy. I opted for a silver Volvo, a solid sedan that didn't shout about the owner's wealth, but promised comfort on long trips and a high level of safety. An excellent choice, Mr. Dunham, Cooper approved. This model is especially popular with travelers. It's very well behaved over long distances. The buying process went smoothly. I paid the full price immediately, signed all the necessary documents, and 2 hours later, I was behind the wheel of my new car. Instead of going home right away, I decided to try the car out. I got on the highway and just drove forward, enjoying the feeling of newness and freedom. I opened the window, letting in the fresh fall air. I turned on the radio and caught a station playing jazz, music Elizabeth had always loved. I drove past the sign that said I was leaving Kansas City. I could have turned back, but I didn't. Instead, I continued on, following the road heading west. Which way? I didn't know yet. Maybe to Colorado, maybe farther to the Pacific. I had time. I had freedom. I had a car, a full tank of gas, and the open road ahead. I thought about Baxter and his family, about what they were going through. It won't be easy, but maybe it's what they need. Something that will help them become stronger, more self-reliant. Something that will ultimately make them happier. And me? I felt strangely light, like I'd lost a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. The unknown was ahead, but it no longer frightened me. At 74, I finally felt truly free. The sun was beginning to slip toward the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. I turned on my headlights and continued on my way. Where to? It wasn't important. What was important was that I was moving forward, not looking back. And in that movement, in that freedom of choice, I had finally found what I had been looking for all my life: peace with myself.